What happens if you're in a session with a client and the client turns around and says something like, "This isn't working and I lost confidence in you. I don't think you know what you're doing because nothing here is helping." For a lot of practitioners, this might be our worst nightmare, a client de-skilling us in the middle of a session. So how do we handle that? How do we respond to that? What do we do if this scenario comes true? Well, here are several solutions. So number one, it's important to acknowledge that pain and thank them for being honest. Because if a client says that, then they're clearly suffering, right? An emotional outburst of, this isn't working, you don't know what you're doing, is coming from a place of pain. That client is suffering and they feel like what we're doing isn't working, and so they're frustrated, they're angry, they're upset. And so it's really important to acknowledge that emotion, make them feel heard, and make sure that you understand that they are upset and they are angry and that it really isn't working for them. That's how they feel, that's what's going on an emotional level. And thank them for being honest, because a lot of clients might not bother to say that. They might just stop coming, they might cancel, not really explaining the reasons for that, and there's nothing we can do about that as practitioners. Whereas if someone says, hang on, this isn't working for me, whether they do that in a very calm way or whether it comes out as an emotional outburst, in some ways that's great, because then we can change something, we can fix something. That's given us an opportunity to help the client in a different way that does work for them. So first thing to do is really make them feel heard, acknowledge that pain, and thank them for being honest. Next thing to do then is to explore these feelings. So if a client says, I don't feel like this is working, explore what those feelings is. Is it anger? Is it upset? Is it a feeling of hopelessness that nothing's going to help them? Is it more a clash of personality with the therapist? Is it the things that we're doing just feel overwhelming, and if we're agreeing homework tasks, then those aren't working? What is it they're feeling about the process? How hopeful do they feel? What's working for them? What isn't? Let's get into that detail a bit more so we can explore that, so that we can ultimately fix that to come up with some solutions. Next thing then is to consider, is there a deficiency in our skills? And we need to be careful here, because it's easy to start thinking negatively of ourselves. But if we're able to step outside of that and without bias consider, is there something more I could learn here? Maybe this client is coming in with they've got an eating disorder, and that's not really something I deal with normally, and so maybe I need to go get some additional training. Or a client is looking for a mindfulness approach, and I don't really cover that, and I discussed that with the client and we said we'd give it a go, but actually what I need to do is go off and do some more reading, do some more learning to be able to help the client better. Maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. It's important that we don't start judging ourselves as good or bad, but we just objectively look at the facts of, are there more skills I need to develop? Number 4 then is review whether you're using the fundamentals. So whatever modality you're using person-centered, using cognitive behavioral, you're using acceptance and commitment, whatever it is, are you going back to the basics, to the textbook, and using that? And there's 2 reasons we should do this. One, it's very easy to become a lazy integrative practitioner, where there's so much stuff, and like, I like this from solutions focused and I like this from mindfulness based cognitive therapy, and we shove them all together because we think they're all super useful ideas that will help the client, but maybe they're not working together in quite that way. And so if we go back to the fundamentals, we've got like a proven way that we know works, and so we can eliminate the idea that it's something we're doing and that it's just that this approach isn't working for the client. And this is important because we can then help the client more, but also if we ever needed to justify what we were doing, if we're a CBT practitioner and we laid out in front of our supervisor or in front of an ethics committee, if they ever made a complaint, what we did, and we could show a pretty standard course of CBT, we're going to get a thumbs up for that. If we've just been randomly mixing and matching without much justification for what we were doing, that's going to be much harder to explain to a client, to our supervisor, to anyone. And so going back and making sure we're sticking to those fundamentals when a client isn't happy, really important task. Next up then, so is there an intellectual versus emotional gap? So this is it's important for anything, but let's use the example of CBT. We've got a client with social phobia, and we're getting them to do some experiments to go into social situation to see if it reduces their anxiety. And what they find is that intellectually they get the idea of all this cognitive distortions and rewriting thoughts and the exposure really easily, and so they think, okay, I completely on an intellectual level understand that this situation isn't threatening and it's my body creating it, but they go into the situation and they still feel panicked and they still feel scared because, as I've talked about in a lot of my courses, it takes time for the emotional part of the brain to catch up with the intellectual part of the brain. So if we've got a banana phobia, very quick for us to realize actually that banana is not dangerous on an intellectual level. But on the emotional level of our brain, it still panics when we go near a banana because it takes a lot of time to get it comfortable with that idea and doing the exposure and looking at the pictures of the banana, then being near a banana, touching a banana, all of those steps is because even though we get it intellectually on day one, it might be day 100 by the time our more emotional systems get it. So if a client is saying, okay, well, I've learned all this stuff, but it hasn't translated into results, is it that they haven't given it enough time, that they need to do more repetitions because we need to wait for the emotional side of the brain to catch up with the really intellectual side of the brain? And then finally, what should you do? Well, how about talking to your supervisor? Because that's what our supervisor is there for, right? If we need support, if we're struggling, if we're wondering whether we are doing the right thing, well, that is exactly what our supervisor is there for. So take this issue to supervision. So hopefully there's some useful ideas there. Let's read through them again. So really acknowledge that pain and thank the client for being honest. Explore the feelings that are coming up for them. Consider whether we do need to do additional skills. Review the fundamentals of the psychotherapy we're delivering. Consider whether it just needs more time because there's an intellectual versus emotional gap, and take the issue to supervision. Hopefully that was useful. If so, please give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe for more videos on mental health and how to deal with these kind of situations, because I would love to see you in another video.